We'll talk about inequality. Sometimes you hear people saying that inequality is just because economics, that one way or another it's inevitable. There's nothing can ever be done. It's all market forces, something similar. That's completely, utterly false. Add that to the list of things that are believed by people who just skim the subject of economics and never go any deeper. Economic theory does explain how differences in starting points become differences in outcomes, but it doesn't say there's any inevitability of starting points, or there's only one path. There are lots of choices that can be made. As we examine history and international comparison, we can see lots of possibilities. Thomas Piketty, I'm not saying his name with the right accent, he's French, sorry. He's done a lot of work on inequality. Sayez and Zuckman as well. Inequality has been rising over most of the globe, although it's diminished a bit in the US post-pandemic. Inequality gets defined in a number of different ways, sometimes looking at the top 10% or the top 1% or the top 1/10 of 1%, or even smaller slices of the very tippity top. As usual in economic definitions, we distinguish between a stock and a flow. In the case of inequality measures, we can look at income, which is the flow of resources, or at wealth, which is the stock of resources. People who consistently get a high income can build that into more wealth by saving some of their income. Finally, note, especially in the US, discussions of inequality inevitably must discuss the differences between different groups based on race and ethnicity. That's not the whole story. There's inequality between black and white people, but also inequality within each group. Now, the graph on the left panel shows income inequality, and the graph on the right panel there is wealth. The little blue bar represents the share of the global total that went to the bottom 50%. In 2022, the bottom 50% of people just got 8.5% of total income and had 2% of total wealth. The top 10% got 52% of income and 76% of total wealth. The 40% in the middle, who are above the median but not in the top 10%, that's that green there, they got 39.5% of income and had 22% of wealth. The bars are the same width in the chart. Perhaps the chart could be improved if the blue bar were broader to remind that it shows the experience of half the people in the world. The red bar is just 1/10 of the people. This chart shows basically the same view, but now split by region and looking at income. Again, the blue bar is the lower 50% of people, the green is the next 40%, the red is the top 10%. The regions are arranged by degree of inequality. Europe has a greater share going to the bottom half and a lower share going to the top 10th. Then East Asia, North America, Russia and Central Asia, South and Southeast Asia, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and MENA, and the Middle East and North Africa. That's the most unequal. Sorry, I need to get my head out of the way for you to see that label there, but trust me, that's what it is. This picture looks at the ratio of the income earned by the top 10% to the income earned by the bottom 50%. Basically simplifying the previous graph to just have the ratio of the red bar to the blue bar, how much taller the red is. This shows a bit more variation of outcomes by country, not just region. Looking closely, you can spot some differences. Europe is generally more equal, Sub-Saharan Africa is less equal. We can see other places where similar countries manage different outcomes, such as Malaysia in yellow there, and Indonesia, much darker. South America stands out for some countries like Brazil being more unequal, while others are in the yellow, they're more equal. Now, inequality is not necessarily bad. Note the map shows that Afghanistan is quite equal. Next, we look at the evolution over time. The graph on the left shows the average annual growth rate of wealth, not income, wealth. This shows people in different percentiles at a finer gradation even on the right-hand side, the 90th and the 99th and the 99.9 and the 99.99, even the 99.999, the top 1,000th of 1%. We can see that half the people on the left-hand side there got about 2% of global wealth growth over that time, with a rise of the middle class in the developing world. Then there's that dip, the stagnation of growth for the lower and middle wealth groups of rich countries. And then there's that tail that shoots way, way, way up. The richest people got vastly richer. The other chart above there shows inequality in the carbon footprint. Just to remind that although we conventionally measure inequality by income or wealth, it translates quite directly into inequality of things like environmental impact. I like this series of graphs. This shows the global income distribution starting way back in 1820, 200 years ago. So you can get a sense of how income has changed. Not to spoil the ending, but there's been a tremendous growth over the past 2 centuries. A couple notes on that horizontal axis. This is created by Europeans, so the numbers are in euro, not dollars. Each euro is worth a little more than $1. The bump of people around 35 euro per month, so that's like $450 a year. $1 something a day. That's desperately poor, but that's most of the world at that time. The histogram is sized to account for the population, so back in 1820 there were far fewer people. Most people were in China, that's the red part there, or India, yellow, with only a few in Europe, green, and other areas almost too small to see. Europe is a little richer, with incomes averaging maybe 60. This is euro per month. Now also the axis uses a log scale, so the left tick mark is at €1 per month, while the right goes past 3,500 per month. It's a big gap of outcomes. That lower panel there shows 1910, just before the First World War. Not too much a change for most people in the world, but Europe had become richer, as had North America. So we can see sort of a second bump of outcomes there. The next panel is 1950. We can see some movement as China and India get a little wealthier, but there's much more of a gap. Now Europe's around 350 or 400 a month. North America is maybe 700. By 1980, in the bottom, China and India were around 90, which more than double where they started, but still a long way to go. Europe and North America were maybe 1,800. That's quite a growth. Then by 2020, there's enormous catch-up. China grew spectacularly. India made tremendous strides. Each grown more than 10 times richer. Sub-Saharan Africa has a wide spread of outcomes. I've put the 1820 graph there again so you can see the differences. There are many, many more people who are many times wealthier. There's more inequality, but perhaps it's not all bad. Some of the inequalities because different regions began growing at different times, but they're nearly all getting richer.